My wife cheated with her boss, stole over $200, $0 from our joint account during our divorce, and now she's claiming half of my family's inheritance worth $1.5 million. Am I crazy for thinking she's just after my money? I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, writing about how my wife turned out to be a complete fraud. Honestly, I thought we had a good life, normal, stable, nothing out of the ordinary. We met in college, got married after a few years of dating, and for a while I genuinely believed I was the luckiest guy alive. She was smart, beautiful, charming, at least that's what I thought. But then slowly cracks started to show. Little things at first, missed calls, late nights at her office, vague excuses about stress and work stuff. I brushed it off, told myself I was paranoid or overthinking. But then came the signs I couldn't ignore anymore. She started acting secretive with her phone. She'd hide it when I came near, and her attitude shifted from loving to defensive. Once, I saw her quickly delete a message that popped up on her screen when she thought I wasn't looking. That was the first real warning bell. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I told myself maybe it was just work-related or a friend she was talking to. I mean, it's not like I had any solid proof, but in my gut something felt off. It all came crashing down one night when I decided to check our joint bank account. We'd always been pretty transparent about money, shared everything really. But that night I noticed a strange withdrawal. Over $200, $0 gone. Just vanished. I stared at the screen thinking maybe it was a mistake or some kind of bank error. But no, the transaction was real. It was made by and it was labeled as a transfer to an unknown account. That's when I started to realize this was no ordinary affair or petty theft. Someone had planned this and it was linked directly to her. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind was racing. How could she do this? Steal that kind of money from us? We had a house, a car, plans for the future. That money was supposed to go toward my sister's college fund, some renovations we'd talked about, and maybe even a little nest egg for retirement. And now it was gone just like that. I felt sick, betrayed, and furious all at once. I had no idea what to do next, but I knew I had to confront her. The worst part, I suspected she'd been lying to me for months, maybe even longer. I felt like I was living with a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. I remember sitting there, staring at the screen, trying to process it all. And then I saw her come into the room, acting normal as if nothing was wrong. That's when I knew I had to find out the truth. I had to ask her where the money was, what she'd been hiding. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to stop until I got them. I decided I'd confront her the next morning, but I already knew deep down that everything was about to change forever. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. My mind kept circling around that missing money, that betrayal. I knew I couldn't just brush it off or pretend everything was fine. I had to get to the bottom of it. I brewed a strong cup of coffee, sat on the edge of the bed, and waited for her to wake up. When finally opened her eyes, she looked fresh and innocent, like she hadn't a care in the world. I could see the false brightness in her eyes, the way she tried to act normal like all was well. I decided to get straight to the point. I told her about the withdrawal, about the money gone from our account. Her face blinked with surprise, then quickly shifted to defensiveness. She sat up, crossing her arms, and started with her usual bullshit. "It's probably some mistake," she said, "maybe a bank error or a fraudster hacked into our account." But I wasn't buying it. I already knew she was lying. The way she looked away, avoiding eye contact, told me everything I needed to know. I pressed her harder. "Did you take that money? Did you have anything to do with that transfer?" Her reaction was instant. She scoffed, rolled her eyes, and threw her hands up. "You're crazy," she snapped. "You think I'd steal from our savings? That's ridiculous. I've been working late, sure. I'm not some thief." Her tone was bitchy, dismissive. She was trying to brush me off like I was overreacting, but I wasn't buying her lies anymore. I could see the cracks in her story, the way her voice quivered just slightly when she said working late. I didn't want to start a fight then and there, but I knew I had to make her face the truth. I told her I was going to check the bank statements myself, and I wanted her to be honest with me. The moment I said that, her expression changed. She looked annoyed, like I was bothering her, and she threw in that classic line, "You're overreacting. It's just money. We'll fix it." But I knew better. Money was never just money to me, especially not when someone I trusted was acting so suspicious. Over the next few hours, I went through every detail I could find online. I pulled up the bank's transaction history, cross-checked everything. That's when I noticed even more disturbing stuff. There were several smaller transfers to different accounts, all in her name or her boss. And I remembered her saying she'd be working late. But she was actually meeting her boss, Mark, more often than she admitted. That's when I started to piece things together. This wasn't just about money. It was about her cheating on me, lying, sneaking around behind my back. I felt sick, angry, and betrayed all at once. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I decided I'd confront her again, but this time with everything laid out on the table. I called her into the living room, looked her straight in the eyes, and told her I knew she'd been lying. About the affair, about the money, about everything. Her face twisted into that bitchy sneer she always wore when she was caught. She everything, of course, called me paranoid, said I was imagining things. But I was. I saw the messages, the bank transfers, the lies. I knew she'd been cheating on me with her boss, Mark, and that she'd been stealing from us for months. The worst part, she still had the nerve to deny it, to act innocent. She started crying, saying I was overreacting, that she loved me, but I could see right through her. She was a liar, a manipulator, and I was finally starting to realize. I'd been blind for too long. I didn't know what was more painful, finding out she was cheating or realizing she'd been stealing from us the entire time. I felt my stomach turn, and I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to decide what to do next, but one thing was clear. Everything had changed forever. After that confrontation, everything felt like it was spinning out of control. My head was pounding, and I couldn't focus on anything except how deeply I'd been betrayed. I sat there staring at her, trying to process the magnitude of her lies, cheating on me with Mark, stealing over $200, $0, and now trying to pretend she was innocent. Her tears and protests didn't matter anymore. I saw her for what she was, a manipulative, selfish woman who was willing to destroy everything we built just to get what she wanted. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let her keep playing these games. I started planning my next move. First, I called my lawyer and explained everything: the theft, her affair, the lies. I told him I wanted to freeze all her accounts, get a forensic audit of our finances, and prepare for a divorce. But even as I did that, a part of me was still trying to hold on to some hope that maybe she'd come clean, admit she'd been wrong, and we could fix this. But deep down, I knew better. I'd been blind for too long, and now I saw her for what she really was: a user, a liar, someone who only cared about herself. Over the next few days, I started digging into her background. I hired a private investigator to follow her around, get evidence of her meetings with Mark, and track her financial activities. It didn't take long to find out that she'd been seeing Mark behind my back for months: secret dinners, hotel stays, and even a few weekend trips. It was like a punch to the gut every time I found out more. The thing that stung the most was how she'd lied so effortlessly, acting like she loved me, like she was committed. Meanwhile, she was sneaking around, stealing from me, and planning her escape with her boss's help. I also found out that she'd been funneling money into offshore accounts, hiding her assets, trying to cover her tracks. She'd even opened a fake company under her name to siphon off more cash. I couldn't believe how calculated she was. It was like she'd planned this entire scheme, cheating, stealing, lying, just to get her hands on my family's inheritance, which she was now claiming was half hers. That's when I realized her greed knew no bounds. She saw my family's wealth, the inheritance worth $1.5 million, as her next target. She was already scheming on how to get her hands on that too. I was furious, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the principle. How could I trust someone who had lied and betrayed me so thoroughly? I'd always thought marriage was about loyalty and honesty, but had shown me that she was only out for herself. I decided I wouldn't let her get away with it. I was going to fight for what was rightfully mine, for the money she'd stolen, and for the dignity she'd so casually discarded. The emotional toll was heavy. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and angry. But I also knew I had to stay strong for myself and for my family. I couldn't let her manipulate her way out of this. I was determined to expose her lies, recover what I could, and make sure she faced the consequences. I didn't know what the future held exactly, but I was done being the naive husband who trusted blindly. From here on, I was playing to win, and I was going to make sure she paid for everything she'd done. The days that followed were a whirlwind. I was juggling the legal battles, the financial audits, and trying to keep my head clear amid the chaos. Every time I looked at her, I saw that bitchy smirk she always wore when she thought she was getting away with something. It made me sick. She kept insisting she was innocent, claiming I was paranoid or jealous, yet I had the evidence piling up against her. The texts, the bank transfers, the offshore accounts, every piece of proof was a dagger in her lies. She tried to spin her story, saying she'd only been doing what she had to do because I was neglecting her, that she needed Mark for emotional support, or that she was just under stress and made some bad decisions. But I knew better. I knew. She was just trying to manipulate me, make me doubt myself, and dodge accountability. She threw around accusations about how I'd been distant, how I didn't appreciate her, how I'd ruined her life. But all I could think about was how she'd ruined ours, our trust, our future, everything. I decided to confront her again, this time with the evidence laid out on the table. I sat her down and told her I'd hired a private investigator, that I'd gone through every email, every bank statement, every secret account she'd tried to hide. Her face went pale, but she kept up that nasty sneer. She snapped at me, saying I was crazy, that I was accusing her of stuff I'd never prove, that I was just jealous and insecure. That's when I finally saw her for what she truly was, a manipulative bitch who would lie her way out of anything. I told her she wasn't going to get away with it, that I was going to divorce her, report her to the authorities for the theft, and take everything she tried to claim, especially that inheritance. She looked at me with that venomous glare and said, "You're just jealous. Because I'm smarter than you. You're a fool if you think you can keep me from getting what I deserve." That was her way of spinning it, trying to turn the tables, make me look like the bad guy. But I was done falling for her lies. I'd seen her true face, and I wasn't going to let her destroy me. Meanwhile, I started putting my plan into motion. I contacted the bank and the authorities. I filed the necessary paperwork to freeze her accounts and start legal proceedings to recover the stolen money. I also contacted a lawyer specializing in divorce and inheritance disputes. I knew she was planning to claim half of my family's inheritance, trying to squeeze every penny out of me, so I needed to be prepared for that fight. I gathered all the evidence I could, her texts with Mark, the offshore account info, the bank statements, everything. I wanted her to know I wasn't going to roll over and let her walk away with a dime of what wasn't hers. The emotional toll was brutal. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. This was the moment I had to stand my ground. I realized that her bitchy attitude, her lies, and her greed weren't going to get her anywhere. I was done being the naive husband who believed in fairy tales. From now on, I was fighting for my dignity, my money, and my future. I knew there would be a long legal battle ahead, but I was ready. I was going to make her pay for everything she'd done, and I was going to come out stronger on the other side. The legal process moved faster than I expected once I handed over all the evidence. The moment the bank froze her accounts, she started panicking. That bitchy attitude she always had slipped away for a moment, replaced by sheer desperation. She tried to spin her lies, claiming she was innocent, that I was just trying to ruin her, but the proof was undeniable. The forensic accountant confirmed she had funneled over $200, $0 into offshore accounts, and her texts with Mark proved they'd been planning this for months. She kept insisting she loved me, that it was all a misunderstanding, that she'd never intended to hurt me. But I wasn't buying it anymore. The woman who lied to my face, stole from our joint account, and cheated with her boss. That wasn't love. That was greed and manipulation. I couldn't believe how fast she turned from a loving wife to a scheming thief. I felt anger rising in my chest every time I saw her fake tears, her desperate pleas, trying to get me to forgive her. I just looked at her with cold eyes and told her to save her breath. There was no way I was going to let her manipulate me again. Meanwhile, I fought tooth and nail to protect what was left of my inheritance. I knew she was planning to claim half, trying to squeeze me dry, so I hired a lawyer who specialized in inheritance disputes. We dug into her past, her financials, and uncovered even more lies. It turned out she'd been secretly working with Mark to drain our savings, funnel money offshore, and prepare for her escape. She was trying to set herself up for a fresh start, leaving me with nothing. I felt sick thinking about how she'd been planning this all along, just waiting for the right moment to strike. The divorce papers were filed, and I made it clear I wasn't going to let her walk away with a dime of what wasn't hers. I'd fought for my money, my reputation, and my dignity, and I was determined to see it through. I knew this was going to be a long, ugly battle. She'd fight dirty, I was sure of it. But I also knew I had the truth on my side. Every lie she told, every fake smile, every attempt to manipulate the system, they all fell apart under the weight of the evidence. It was a brutal, emotional, but I learned a lot about who she really was. The woman I'd married, the one I thought I knew, was nothing but a user and a liar. I felt betrayed at the core, but I also felt a strange sense of liberation. I was finally taking back control. I was done feeling guilty or ashamed. She had pushed me to the brink, but I refused to let her win. I was going to make sure she paid for her lies, her theft, and her greed. And when this was all over, I knew I'd come out the other side stronger, more cautious, and finally free from her manipulative grip. The final months were a blur of court dates, negotiations, and a relentless battle to reclaim what she tried to steal from me. I stayed focused, kept my head clear, and refused to let her see me break. The day the judge finally ruled in my favor, awarding me the remaining inheritance and ordering her to pay back every penny she'd stolen, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. It was over, but the damage she'd done to my trust and my sense of security would take longer to heal. Looking back, I realize how much I underestimated her. She always played the victim, always spun her lies, and I was too blind to see the truth. But I also learned something crucial. Don't ignore the red flags. Don't dismiss your gut feelings just because everything seems fine on the surface. People can hide their true selves very well, and sometimes the only way to find out the truth is to dig deep and be willing to face uncomfortable realities. The betrayal changed me. I've become more cautious, more skeptical, but also more aware of what I deserve. I won't let anyone manipulate or use me again. I've started rebuilding my life, focusing on my family and my future, knowing that I can survive even the worst betrayals. My advice to anyone in a similar situation: trust your instincts, gather your evidence, and don't be afraid to fight for what's rightfully yours. Because in the end, truth and integrity will always prevail, even if it costs everything to get there. I've learned that some people are only out for themselves, and they'll do anything to get what they want, even if it means destroying others in the process. But I also learned that resilience, honesty, and a firm stance can turn things around. I'm still healing, still recovering, but I'm finally at peace. And if there's one thing I want others to take away from my story, it's this: never let betrayal define you. Stand up, fight back, and reclaim your life, because you're worth it.